This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Conflict of Heroes Storms of Steel, the 3rd edition. Conflict of Heroes Storms of Steel was released in 2019 by Academy Games and designed by Uwe Jim and Gunter Jim. This game supports up to 4 players and takes from 1 to 4 hours to play. Conflict of Heroes Storms of Steel is a tactical war game set in the Eastern Front of World War II. Players engage each other as the German Wehrmacht versus the Soviet Red Army in one of 16 missions during the 1943 Battle of Kursk. To begin a game, players select a scenario from the mission book. Using one or more of the game's modular terrain boards, they build the battlefield and place their forces, represented by double-sided counters, called units. These units represent historically accurate groups of soldiers and armored vehicles such as tanks. Each player also receives a command action point track that they use to manage their forces' actions. The mission's time and score are recorded with the round and victory track. A deck of battle cards allows a player to challenge their opponent with special actions. Dice, stress, and hit markers are also added to the gameplay area. Each of the game's missions consists of several rounds. During a round, players will alternate taking a turn where they conduct a single action. An action could be to move a unit to an adjacent hex, attack a target, rally a hit unit back into the fight, or play a battle card. Each action costs a number of points based on the difficulty of the task. After the action is completed, the player will roll a custom 10-sided die to conduct a spent check to see if the unit becomes exhausted. The more points the player uses to conduct their action, the greater chance that the unit will become spent. Be aware though, repeatedly using the same unit will cause it to become stressed. When this happens, a stress marker is placed on the unit. A stress marker adds a point to that unit's action cost. When it comes to firefights, combat replicates the historical reality of the time period. Units can only engage enemy targets within their range and line of sight. To score a hit on the enemy, the target's defense rating is subtracted from the attack rating to arrive at the hit number. This is the number the attacker must beat by rolling 2 6-sided dice. When an attack is successful, the player randomly draws a hit marker and places it on the target. A single hit marker often impairs that unit's ability to fight. In this state, if the unit is hit again, the second hit marker will remove the unit from the game. Therefore, players must work to rally inflicted units back into the fight and remove these conditions before they're hit again. As players continue to take turns, more units will become spent and unable to take further actions. Each player has a limited bank of command action points, or caps, that allow them to take actions with spent units, or adjust the odds of any die rolls. When players run out of fresh units and caps, they will need to pass to end the current round and progress to the next round, which will allow them to refresh their units and draw new cards. As time advances toward the final round, players will score victory points for achieving mission objectives. When the mission ends, the player with the most victory points is declared the winner. If all of this sounds interesting, then stick around, because I'm going to break down the rules for Conflict of Heroes Storms of Steel from Academy Games. For this breakdown series, I will be following the learning design from the Storms of Steel 3rd edition rulebook. This rulebook is designed to prepare players for specific missions. Early episodes of this series will cover the content from pages 1 to 18, which focus on rules necessary to play mission 1 and 2. Later episodes will follow this format for more complex missions. Keep this strategy in mind if you want to reference concepts discussed here in the formal rules. Now that you have a basic idea of Storms of Steel's game flow, let's go back to the beginning and learn to play the game in much greater detail. Starting with Setup. To begin a game, players select a scenario from the mission book. To teach this game, I will often reference mission number 1, the Courier's Satchel. Each mission has a 2-page spread that provides players with the general situation, the setup information, mission objectives, and victory conditions. Using the mission book as a guide, players will build the battlefield with the game's modular boards. The courier's satchel only uses board number 7. A board can be identified by its number printed in the corner. Each board's graphic is overlaid with a hex grid and an alphanumeric coordinate system. This enables players to accurately set up the game pieces. Next, each player will place their command action point track. These tracks are used to manage the actions of each player's forces in the game. Each side will place their cap marker on space 6. The mission's time and score are recorded with the round and victory track. Place the time marker on the space for round 1. As for the victory point track, the victory point marker in this game is double-sided, one side for the Soviets and one side for the Germans. This scenario begins with the Soviet side up on the 1 space. Since this track does not have a 0, for the German player to take the lead, they must score a victory point to reduce the Soviet player's point and flip the marker over to the German side. As gameplay proceeds and both players score points, the marker is adjusted in this fashion. Next, let's place the units on the board for both sides, beginning with the Soviet player. The scenario begins with the Soviet player's 5 units, the Shapino Rifle Company, in set positions on the board. Each unit in the game is represented by a double-sided cardboard counter with a distinct identification number found at the top. Collect these exact numbered counters and place them at the coordinates shown in the mission book and on the screen. A Soviet courier delivering the stolen satchel will appear in the second game round at the western end of the main road. A good way to remember to place these units is to put their markers on the round track. And now let's set up the units for the German side. The German player brings half of a rifle platoon to the game board in waves. 2 Panzer Grenadier units are placed in the first round anywhere along the upper eastern edge of the game board. 2 additional German infantry units will arrive in round 2 and can be placed anywhere along the northern edge. Whenever a unit enters the game board, it's treated similar to a movement action. For example, in round 1, the German player has the initiative, which means they go first. They can move a Panzer Grenadier from the 1 space on the mission round track to the designated area on the game board. An exception to this action compared to regular movement is that the unit does not perform a spent check when being placed. However, the unit does receive a stress marker since they took an action. Following the Soviet player's turn, if the German player decides to take an action with that unit again, they will add a point to the cost due to stress. Or, the German player can bring the 2nd Panzer Grenadier from the round track to the game board. The German player would then move the stress marker from the 1st Panzer Grenadier to the 2nd Panzer Grenadier. Remember, the stress markers are only used as a reminder of the last unit that took an action. This is not a permanent condition, or one that needs to be rallied from. Before covering the setup for the remainder of this mission, let's learn about the general situation, each side's orders, and victory conditions. Shortly before Operation Citadel, a Soviet probe intercepts a courier carrying a satchel with German deployment orders. An elite platoon of Panzer Grenadiers is immediately dispatched to retrieve the satchel. The provincial Soviet commander orders the documents delivered to an intelligence officer at headquarters for translation. With the local front a beehive of activity on both sides, getting the satchel to headquarters is easier said than done, Panzer Grenadiers notwithstanding. Each side has their orders. The German player must retrieve the document satchel before Soviet intelligence can translate and pass on your deployment orders. Victory points can be earned as follows. 1 victory point immediately per Soviet unit destroyed. 2 victory points immediately if a German unit exits the map with the satchel control marker. The unit may exit from either of the 2 German entry areas. and 1 victory point at the mission's end if the satchel control marker is under German control, either on or off the map. The Soviet player's orders are to deliver the German document satchel to the regional headquarters stone building at H7 and H8. That player can earn 1 victory point immediately per German unit destroyed, and 1 victory point at the end of each round if the Soviets control the satchel in the stone headquarters building at hex H7 or H8. Now that we've prepared the board and each player understands their mission and objectives, let's set up the remainder of the gameplay area, beginning with the battle card deck. The setup information for building a mission's battle deck is communicated by several icons. The icon at the top of the page shows the card numbers to include in the shuffled deck. Each player's setup section will show additional icons that tell them the number of cards they get to draw. The first icon shows a player the number of cards they get to draw at the beginning of the game's first round. The second icon, the number of cards to draw each subsequent round. For example, in this mission, players draw 2 cards at the beginning of the game, and 1 card every round after that. While we're here, let's talk about the additional icons shown. The blue icon refers to the number of caps each player receives, and the yellow icon is for any victory points that player receives at the beginning of the game. Now, let's learn how to build this mission's battle deck. Storms of Steel includes 3 types of cards: battle cards, weapon cards, and veteran cards. For playing the Courier's Satchel, we will only use battle cards. Battle cards each have an ID number in the lower left-hand corner. The scenario will indicate the ID numbers of the battle cards to include. The Courier's Satchel requires battle cards numbered 1 through 13. When building the deck, be aware there are multiple copies of each card type. Battle card number 1 has 4 copies, battle card number 2 8 copies, and so on. Therefore, when building a battle deck for the first scenario, make sure you have all copies of the required cards. When you are finished building your deck, you should have a total of 36 battle cards. Once you've located all your battle cards, shuffle them into a deck and place them in the gameplay area. Then each player will draw 2 cards. After that, place the game's dice and stress markers. Finally, prepare the hit markers for gameplay. There are 2 types of hit markers: red hit markers for soft targets, and blue hit markers for armored targets. This mission only uses red hit markers. When a unit is hit, players will need to draw one of these markers. Hit markers can be placed in an opaque cup or a bag. Another option is to place all the hit markers face down on the table and randomize them. One final note to consider: new players, and especially those who have never played a wargame before, should have the best possible experience with this game. Therefore, it is recommended that players remove all destroyed hit markers from their first game. This will prevent a unit from getting eliminated the first time it gets hit. Also, each new player should receive an additional adrenaline battle card that they can use each game round. This card will give that player an extra opportunity to use a spent unit while they learn to manage their overall troop actions. Naturally, when new players become familiar with the rules, you can remove these aids and transition to the full experience. And now that we've set up the first mission, the Courier's Satchel, in the next episode we will begin learning how to play. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.